I got a rant here on this one. Players should not make checks in Dungeons & Dragons or other tabletop roleplay games like DC 20 RPG. If they have a check, they should not be asking for a check. Can I make a perception check? Players should be immersed in the world and saying the types of things they're doing. The Dungeon Master should ask for the checks or not. And there's a bunch of reasons why. So for this rant, I'm going to use 3 different skills. Acrobatics to move around stuff, persuasion to convince people, and perception to observe things. In the acrobatics example, we'll have some sort of obstacles and weird stuff. You have to do some parkour moves and acrobatics stuff to get around. The persuasion example is going to be some sort of shopkeeper or guard that they're having to persuade and trying to convince of something. And for the perception example, they're going to be in a dungeon exploring it and looking around. So first up is honestly my rule on skill checks. I don't let that happen. It's something you do have to set as a tone at your table and a general expectation of how the communication happens across the table. If I describe a bunch of stuff and obstacles in the way and someone says, okay, cool, can I make an acrobatics check? No. Or there's a shopkeeper or guard they want to get something from and they just simply say, I want to make a persuasion check. No. And this example might show you where I'm going with it. They're running through a dungeon, they're walking through and they get to the next room and they just simply say out of nowhere, can I make a perception check to see what I see? No. This is something I talk about with all my players in session 0 and in my campaigns I consistently remind players of, and over time they get it. I would just simply say, you just worry about what you're doing and you tell me what you're doing. I'll worry about the checks. Timeout. We're talking about bringing players into your world, increasing their immersion by not asking them for checks and just having them be in that world. Well, another way you can do this is with today's sponsor. Man, what a great segue. I'm talking about World Anvil. And I think this is a feature of World Anvil that I don't think is talked about enough. It's an entire professional platform of world building that you can use that does all the hard work for you. It is literally designed for world building, campaign prep, timelines, all this different stuff and features that they keep adding more and more. They do with a lot of DM's job for them. And whenever I've gone through and built out parts of my world, they ask questions I might not thought of even asking for myself. Sent me down rabbit holes, and I thank World Anvil for sending me down. And when you can present something like this to your players that all the work is done for them, on top of it, World Anvil did some work, the DM did some work, and now they are presented with a great world to be immersed in. And there's even parts of it that the players can add into and you all add together as a team. So dive into World Anvil with the link down in the description. You can play around on there for free and see all the different stuff they have, and they have even more options to unlock. So thank you, World Anvil, for helping us forging those worlds and for sponsoring this video. All right, now back to the checks. Because the second reason the players shouldn't be asking for checks is the thing they're asking for a check for might not even require a check. Think about how many times players describe that they do something and then they just do it. The big strong barbarian describes some sort of strength-based thing and they do it. I don't want that barbarian to describe a strength-based thing and then ask for a strength check or ask for an athletics check. Just stop it. Tell me what you do. I will think and evaluate if I need to ask for a check or not. It's not on the player to decide when that moment happens. Maybe you said something so persuasive that I'm like, oh wow, they go right along with it. Maybe your character's acrobatics is so high you don't need to make an acrobatics check and you just go across the thing. But the clumsy little person in the party, they do have to make the acrobatics check. And in Dungeons for Perception, there's a default base level of things that I'm describing. And in the room, and they enter the room, I'm going to describe to you what you see. And even if you roll the nat 1 on a perception check, you're going to see the basic stuff in front of you. You don't just go blind out of nowhere. But if you want to ask for something, you don't ask me for a perception check, which then brings me to point number 3. Describing what you do flavors everything that you do. What do I mean by that? If you're in this dungeon and you say, what do I see as a perception check? You're not thinking of what you're looking for. You got to tell me, communicate across the table. What are you looking for? And if you put this precedent on the table where you can't just say perception check, they have to now say what they're doing. God forbid, that's the key to the game. And now once this precedent is set in place, players can walk into the room, and even if they vaguely describe something, I want to look around and see what's on the ceiling. Sure, make a perception check. Or maybe a player describes that they want to look behind them and make sure that there's no one following them. Ooh, cool, make a perception check or a survival check. You know, looking for tracks and stuff. And that accidentally brings me to the 4th point of sometimes what a player is describing, the Dungeon Master might have a cool interpretation and give them some options of what that kind of check could be. Maybe what they describe actually sets up in their character's proficient at survival. So the Dungeon Master's like, you know what? Checking the tracks to see who's following you, make a survival check. And they're better at survival than perception. And the opposite is true, because if you're going through the streets and you describe just kind of running through stuff, that's not an acrobatics-based thing. That's a strength-based thing. Okay, give me a strength check. But then the player might be like, no, I was trying to do acrobatics. Okay, describe something acrobatically. And I'm not trying to be a jerk here about like, no, you need to say the right, like describe what your character's doing. How would your character do this. And I think that's a fine point to challenge your players on, because if they describe running through something, that's not very acrobatic. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen this exact moment where somebody describes something they weren't going for. I tell them to make a check that they weren't intending for, and then they have to rethink things like, you know what? All right, well, if I do this, and then the beautiful stuff happens. Why I'm using this example is because of this exact thing. I had that exact thing happen, and a player looked at their character sheet and, you know what? I have a grappling hook. Am I able to kind of use my grappling hook around the tops of this city to kind of go around and swing from place to place? I'm like, that's awesome. You do that, and you automatically go, and you going through. I might not even ask them to make a check if they have this really cool description of how they do it. Great problem solving, outside the box thinking, good job. Or I might just assign them advantage out of nowhere. Dungeon Master advantage, be like, oh wow, yeah, do make an acrobatic check with advantage. The same thing is true for persuasion. A lot of times people get upset with charisma based checks because I'm not the most charismatic type of person, or I don't know how to role play as well, and I don't really know what to say. That's not what I'm asking you for. I'm not asking you to put on some sort of mega role play performance. What are you trying to persuade them with? What types of things are you saying? You don't have to role play that. You just are thinking about what categorically are you trying to persuade them with. Maybe they're talking to a shopkeeper, and before that they talked to an opposing shopkeeper who gave them a bunch of lore dirt information on this person. If they use that, maybe they automatically succeed or get advantage. Or in the opposite situation, maybe you're talking to the guards and you're trying to persuade them, and you accidentally let it slip that y'all accidentally did some sort of crime or something, and the guard's like, wait a second, what'd you say? Timeout. If you are playing a character that's wildly more smart than you, or wildly more charismatic than you, all of those types of things, you can easily talk and rationalize it out with your dungeon master. If there's some sort of puzzly type thing that's going on, or some sort of interaction socially, and you're like, would my character know any sort of things about this person? Maybe then you make a history check or a charisma, some sort of check to be able to have the dungeon master give you some sort of information or clues. Be careful how much you do this, because you don't want to put all of this impetus on your dungeon master to have to solve the problems for you. But just think about, I want to try and persuade them with money, or try and persuade them with, I'm going to offer to do a task for them. And you could be as general as that and let the dungeon master take it from there. You're just putting more mental burden on your dungeon master. You're like, I don't know, charisma check, I got a 15, I say something that's good. That's just lame. Put some effort and collaboration into it. Collaborate with your dungeon master instead of just putting it all on them. I've even seen it turn into a table discussion of what their characters would know, and I've chimed in about what kinds of things would you know. Oh, you know, we did talk to that other shopkeeper. That's right, they did tell us some stuff. And then now, oh yeah, your character would know that they have a dirty secret. Now that character just says, I want to talk to them about their dirty secret and try and intimidate them or persuade them. Awesome, love it. Give me a persuasion with advantage. That's a far better moment than persuasion check. Now back to that dungeon for the example of talking about checks. I don't want people to just say perception check. I want them to describe to me what they're looking for. Describe how you're jumping through the city. Describe how you're persuading. Describe what you're looking for. And these moments are also where perception versus investigation come in, which could be a whole nother topic, but I see perception as looking around and being observant with things around you, and investigation is interacting, touching with, and trying to figure out how something's working or where something is. Something like a secret compartment inside a dresser drawer or something like that. You have to move around and look. That's not a perception thing, that's an investigation thing. So a lot of times those DCs are different depending on if they're doing perceptive things or investigative things. And depending on what they describe instead of what they ask for, I can ask for those checks. If I have a DC 20 set for somebody following them and a DC 20 set for a secret trapdoor, and the players enter this room that they're now in that has a trapdoor and someone's following them, I'm going to see what they ask for. And if someone specifically is looking for someone following them, DC drops by 5. Someone specifically looking for a trapdoor, the DC drops by 5. For that person. Now let's say those people roll and they get below a 15, they get like a 10 or something, or a nat 1, whatever, they don't see it. And then the persons that are generally describing things and doing a perception check for what's on the ceiling and stuff, and they get like a 22, yes, they are looking for the ceiling. I'll describe all the stuff that's on the ceiling, but they also hear something behind them. So I don't penalize players for specifically saying what they're looking for, and they still can get those general DCs that I set, but it's just nothing but a positive thing for them to be more flavorful and specific on what they're looking for, and be more specific about what they're persuading people on, or more specific on how they're moving through the world. So in the big picture overview of this whole thing now, it's going to be a better experience at the table. I've watched multiple live plays on different streams before where players just ask for checks, and it just leads to a moment that lands flat for me. Like, can I make a perception check? For what? Just what are you talking? Describe what you do. Stop it. Stop it. Another good example that just came to me are insight checks. Now I know it's kind of a meme and a joke at the table of somebody and some NPCs being sketchy and then a player's just like, insight check. That's a funny thing. So my players do say that, and that's like a funny joke. But in fact, in general, a lot of my players don't do that, because what they should do is, do I feel like they're lying to me? That's the most basic type of insight check. Or do I feel like they have, like, in my players now, start to ask, like, what are they trying to insight off of this person? Because an insight check is not just a human lie detector test. Do I feel like they're being honest? Do I feel like they have an ulterior motive? Do I feel like they're scared and nervous right now? Those are much better than insight check. And in the same way of what I described earlier, depending on what kind of thing they're trying to glean from this person, I might be more specific on what they get as information. So yes, you are going to have to train your players to do this. And players, send your players this video just to see that you all get on the same page about what this will feel like, because it will feel better at the table. It'll lead to everyone describing what they're doing more and pulling people into the world instead of yanking them back up to the table surface level of looking at a character sheet and saying a check. And then once everybody at the table has seen this video and you can all talk and hold each other accountable for, describe what you're doing. And that's the simplest thing you can do as a dungeon master. Be like, what? Just describe me what you're doing. And then they can reset and describe what they're doing. And then you can ask them for the check. And all of this stops players from just rolling checks. That's one of my biggest pet peeves, is when a player just makes a check for themselves and rolls it out of nowhere. And 23 perception. Nope, that's not, I never even asked for that check. So that's a hard no. Because there's also a subtle thing that just popped into my head as well. Whenever players are in a very low stakes situation, you're just in a normal house. They ask you to describe it. They just want to look around and see if they see anything under the beds or whatever. And this isn't a high stakes situation. This is just not something that you want to ask for a check for, and you just describe to them exactly what they see and you keep moving. But that choice is on the dungeon master to decide if it's just information that you would get and there's not any secrets, which is also a good way of getting across the vibe of like, oh, this is just, okay, cool, this is what you see. But there's also been plenty of times where there's absolutely nothing for them to find and I still ask them for that investigation check. Then they roll low and they're like, oh, dang it, there must be something here, and you still want to get that vibe across too. Always fun to watch them squirm, but overall you want to be able to have your players describe what they're doing, pull them into the world, think about what their character is doing, not what the player sitting at the table is trying to make a check for. I genuinely hope this helps clean up some different feelings at the table of these bad vibes that kind of come out with these weird little moments for the Dungeon Master and for the players. And if this does help, it would really help me if you hit that subscribe button. I never usually ask for these things, but it really does help the channel out, and we're getting so close to 50,000 subscribers, and it's taken a while to get here, and I really would love to see that. Hit that goal. It'd be super exciting. So you can help me out in that way, and I hope that in some way in this video or others that I've helped you. So until next time, stay creative, think outside that box. Peace.